One, two. Olá, pessoal. Boa tarde. Para quem está no BR, são 5. Para quem está fora do Brasil, é um pouco mais. Depende, né? Nos Estados Unidos agora são 4, aqui no Brasil 5, na Europa já são 9. Hoje o nosso tema é justamente privacidade, na verdade IA e privacidade, um panorama aqui de IA e privacidade na América Latina, né? Como é que o impacto das regulações de IA na América Latina. E a nossa convidada especial de hoje é a Maria Badillo, da Fundação do Privacy Forum, do Future Privacy Forum, na verdade. A nossa conversa vai ser em inglês. So, welcome, everybody. Welcome, Maria. First, I need appreciate your time to dedicate to share your knowledge with us and FPF. So we have this our 60 women community in privacy. We always have women guests, special guests, to discuss privacy and data protection laws, cybersecurity, and AI. In this moment, our focus is the AI regulation in Latin America Panorama, right? So please introduce yourself for our audience here, and let's go. It's your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Alessandra. Thank you, everyone in the audience. I'm not able to see you, unfortunately, but I'm very, very happy to be here. Also, very honored to be participating and be part of this very great and relevant initiative, which is Women in Privacy. I must admit, it is actually one of my first talks in this sort of communities. So I'm truly honored to be part of this, at least for today. And hopefully I'm going to be able to continue to contribute to the discussion. So to talk a little bit about myself, thank you, Alessandra, for the brief introduction. I'm Maria Badillo. I'm the policy counsel with the global privacy team of the Future of Privacy Forum. So the Future of Privacy Forum, for those of you that have not heard of us before, is an international, with global offices, nonprofit organization that basically intends to advance responsible data practices. We have different work streams, working groups, and we also focus, particularly on the global team, we focus on developments on anything related to data protection and privacy in several jurisdictions. So one of my principal roles, aside from collaborating in other projects of the global team, is to mainly cover and monitor all the privacy and data protection developments happening in Latin America. And I'm particularly happy to be here in what I feel it's mostly a Brazilian forum, because Brazil, as most of you know, is one of the most active enforcers and the most active DPAs that we've seen in recent time. So let's start.
Yes. Can I share the screen, your slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Let's do it.
So here. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Alessandra. Okay, so as Alessandra mentioned, I will try to, in the next couple of minutes, provide a very general overview of the challenges in data privacy and data protection, and also particularly with regards to AI regulation. How are we evolving in the Latin American region in particular? And first of all, I would like to start by reminding the audience here, and I'm sure most of us know that in some of the Latin American countries, if not in the majority of them, we have a particular constitutional recourse that it's not very common to find in other jurisdictions, which is the the habeas data or habeas data. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's in Latin. So this is particularly a relevant mechanism in the Latin American region, as I was mentioning, where we see that some countries still lack a comprehensive data protection framework, or even if they have a comprehensive data protection framework, not all of them are updated and up to the task of the demands of technological evolution. And also, the habeas data becomes a relevant mechanism, considering that enforcement is also not very particularly active in Latin America in comparison to other jurisdictions, at least. Now, we find that there are some variations from country to country on how they regulate or not regulate habeas data, but in a nutshell, this is a legal recourse, a constitutional mechanism that can be brought up by any citizen against any register to find out the information that is held about this person. And it doesn't matter whether it is in public or private registers. And this includes the possibility of requesting rectification, update, and even the destruction of personal information. Very importantly, with habeas data is that we don't see a limitation for manual or automated registers, which means that this constitutional recourse could provide an interesting way for, or an interesting like option for protecting personal information that is being processed through AI systems in some scenarios, of course. Now, of course, habeas data is not sufficient in itself to provide this like general adequate legal protection for personal data and for protecting information in the context of AI. But I think it is still relevant to keep it in mind that particularly in our region, we have this additional constitutional protection. Now, moving on to the actual landscape of data protection laws and regulations in the region, we see that at least 12 countries have enacted a comprehensive data protection law and secondary regulations. And the laws can vary greatly. However, they do have a similar structure on terms of scope and applicability, on data subject rights, on obligations for controller, processor, and provisions for enforcement and supervision. And another important aspect is that most of the first generation laws that were actually enacted in the late 90s and in the early 2000s were heavily influenced by the European model, specifically by the former Directive 95. And as we know, the EU has moved on to update their framework with a new binding set of rules through the GDPR. In Latin America, of course, we have not shifted or we have not updated our laws in the same rate or parallel to the EU. But we do see that newer laws such as the LGPD or some of the proposals to update laws, for instance, in Colombia and in Argentina, are very much influenced by the GDPR as well. Now, currently, some countries with these old laws that I mentioned previously are in the process of updating their laws, and the need for or the justification for updating these laws is actually because some of these laws are already considered obsolete in the face of technological evolution. So, for instance, it's not very common to find provisions relating to the automated processing of personal data in some of the laws in the Latin American region, which is basically the core of AI. So there is not sufficient protection, some could argue. Now, other laws are also seeking to include additional basis for the processing of personal data and to step aside a little bit from the consent-only approach to include other lawful basis for the processing, and also to include other mechanisms to facilitate the cross-border data transfers. Now, some are also looking to update their laws, particularly to give more teeth to enforcers. This is in the sense of increasing the sanctions and penalties whenever there is a violation to the data protection regulations. And so we have like this panorama or this set of reasons of why it's necessary to update these laws. And some may argue that the data protection framework must be first strong enough before we attempt to regulate AI. And this, of course, makes sense, right? Because most of the data protection provisions will essentially continue to apply in the context of AI, as long as personal data is being processed. So, of course, it is necessary to update these legal frameworks. However, despite the situation, I think that laws in Latin America still provide a very good basis or a clear foundation for the protection of personal data, even in the context of AI. Can we go to the next slide?
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So why do I say this? So first, I think that many of the basic data protection principles that we find in these data protection laws, such as transparency, access, purpose limitation, accuracy, accountability, etc., they are also applicable and transferable to in the context of processing personal data through an AI system, right? Secondly, we see, and similar to what happens with habeas data, is that data protection laws do not always distinguish between manual or automated processing. So we should assume, in the light of an extended protection of fundamental rights, that automated processing is actually covered by many of these data protection laws. And third, and this is a very interesting aspect, is that with the existent or with the current tools and mechanisms provided to data protection authorities, we have seen DPAs take a more active role in regulating and supervising AI through their already given powers, through their data protection mandate. So a few examples of this include DPAs issuing guidance and orientation from years ago on the applicability of data protection provisions and principles in the context of AI. Another reason is that DPAs are monitoring and enforcing data protection laws in the context of AI. So, for example, and I think this is very relevant to mention, just this morning, the ANPD released a suspension order against Meta, or for Meta, stopping them from using personal data to train its AI models. And this was on the basis that the company, that Meta, did not provide an adequate information to data subjects that this was happening, or that their data was being processed for this purpose. And it also made a link to the principle of purpose limitation, for instance. And a third reason is that there is also, or it seems to be, an increased collaboration among data protection authorities to monitor the operations of AI systems. So an example of this is the recent creation of a working group within the Ibero-American network of data protection authorities that recently opened an investigation into ChatGPT. And basically, I think they would also look into other generative AI tools, but mostly right now, the ongoing investigation is into ChatGPT.
By the way, this is a trend topic today. All people in privacy chats and privacy forums discuss about this ANPD decision about to block the Meta, because they are very funny. They not give the correct information about the data subject. Oh, we have your data, and maybe look like a good idea training our LLM models using your personal data, maybe, just maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And data that is going like years back, like information like from years ago that you could have never even possibly thought that would be in one moment in time be used to train AI models, which makes it particularly significant, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. So okay. Perfect. So now I would like to transition a little bit to the state of play of AI governance in Latin America. So having said this, and even though the context of Latin American data protection can have an impact on the processing, on protecting the processing of personal data by AI systems, there seems to be a global consensus that this is not sufficient and that we need to be regulating AI on its own. So here the reasons are many. We have heard that AI particularly presents new risks and possibilities that can fundamentally alter the way humans interact with computers, with machines, and also affect us in many fields, such as employment, education, healthcare, or even increasing public surveillance. Now, we also know that AI can produce biased results, which is coming from biased data or biased analysis from the very own humans assessing the system or monitoring the system. And this can increase or lead to further discrimination against already vulnerable and marginalized groups. Now, finally, another reason to regulate AI on itself is that this type of technologies, and particularly generative AI, and ChatGPT, for example, are becoming increasingly accessible to the wider public with not much regulation, with not much guidance. So from kids to adults, we've seen people using this sort of tools. And although we can envision this having some sort of benefits in the long term, it can also create new threats in several alleys, such as in misinformation, generating fake news, impersonation, among others. Now, in this context, many governments and international organizations have claimed that AI regulation is necessary for the functioning of democracies and the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms. So, talking about AI governance, we believe that this can be achieved through a different set of tools. So, AI governance can be achieved through legislation, international treaties, principles, regulatory control environments such as sandboxes or test beds, and even industry or technical standards and best practices. And many different stakeholders can have a play in this. And in fact, we have seen a lot of interest from global key players to participate in the discussion of AI governance. So when I say key players, I'm referring to governments, international organizations, technical institutions, or industry agencies, and so on. So first, I will try to address some of the legislative efforts that we've seen in the region, and then some of the efforts from international organizations that have helped shape the debate on AI regulation. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So in Latin America, at least, legislation for now, and this also happens in other regions, it seems to be the preferred approach or the preferred tool to regulate the challenges brought by AI. So starting with the European Union and the state of Colorado in the USA, they have recently enacted AI legislation, and they have become like the first region, the first jurisdictions to do so. Now, in Latin America, this is also true. And as we know, some countries like Brazil, Chile, Mexico, they are also aiming to pass legislation in AI. Brazil being the most advanced and serious proposal so far, and it might even get approved very, very soon. I don't know, Alessandra, if you have
Yes,
heard any.
now we discuss this because in the truth, I am not lawyer. I am the tech person, but I study laws in Brazil and outside Europe and United States. For example, when I see your comparison between risk approach and rights, I think that the Biden Act is not a law, but it's an act for U.S. So when we compare, they use more rights, data subject rights approach more than risk. But what I see in Brazil is that we need handling or we need fixed problems in the AI Brazil Act because we have excessive lawyers and they really need be right and they do not understand the technology. If you want to regulate the technology, you need to understand this because you cannot control the technology. It's like I make a comparison. It's like the same with science. You not control the science, but you control who make the science, right?
Exactly.
You establish borders, risks approach, or other civil rights to preserve. And now, in this moment in Brazil, they open, I'm not sure, but 5 discussions, public discussions, to try fix conceptual problems in the law, in Brazilian law, in this case. And yesterday have a one public discussion, and they have more 4. I'm not sure, but I think that have more 4 open to some civil society organizations or no, or some groups, technical group, etc. They try collect more feedbacks to try fix the problems. The problem in make laws in Brazil is that we have too much lobby, too much lawyers, and they really do not understand the impact of the technology for the people. What we want to protect the civil rights. Why we want to protect civil rights, creating a AI regulation. For example, we know that we have a greatest or higher risk to automate many process, and when you automate the many process, you fire persons, right? So we need create a law that regulate the responsible AI use because people even know your civil rights and they don't have idea how much the massive AI use can impact your lifestyle, your society, your environment. So we need discuss a little more to try fix some concept problems, and these concept problems in our law is a problem because if you do not understand the concept in the practice, you will make in the wrong way because you do not understand the essential concept, the theory. You need understand the theory to understand, okay, so this is the essential. Okay, what I can do with this according to the law, establish limits, safety and security limits to preserve democracy, civil rights, preserve the society, the try minimize the impacts for the society in the end of the day.
Exactly, and this is very interesting to what I was gonna mention in a few moments. because as we see, there are like different approaches to regulating AI, and as at least what I've seen, particularly in Latin America, is that most of the governments that do not have proposals to regulate AI, they have this very similar argument to what you were saying, and even coming like from experts and lawyers and policymakers saying we need to wait a little bit more on how this technology will develop, how will evolve, and also learn a little bit more from regulatory approaches that are being taken, so for instance, by Colorado, by the European Union, or for instance, Brazil. Uh, the experience, if Brazil passes this AI bill, will be very, very valuable to inform how other countries in Latin America may react, and to see how they will develop their own regulations. But what I wanted to say is that they are like, on one side, they seem to be waiting, like they are adopting like this more wait and see approach on to better understand the technology, and others are taking a more like principles based, a rights based approach, which in my opinion, of course I could be wrong, but in my opinion, it does help to not over regulate these technologies, because precisely as you're mentioning, we don't know like the full scope or the full scalability that these technologies can get, or in the future, or like all the potential implications. So as you said, establishing limits in the sense of establishing like general principles um, can be really useful. And I know that some like human rights organizations even advocate for a very like human rights strong approach for regulating AI, which I think it could also be really beneficial. And perhaps like more detailed regulation can come by sector or industry specific regulators. But that's just like a couple of thoughts, and I think for sure we need to wait and see a little bit on how this will continue to evolve.
Yes, because we cannot stop the innovation, okay? But we know that usually, I have a regional expression here. I said that the good census, the goodwill, is not embedded in all human persons, because this we need the laws, because people, it's not they, we know that the goodwill is not common sense, because this we need to establish the laws, because people need understand the threshold, they need to understand the limit, because if you not establish the limit, people do what they want to do, and we have a chaos. We have a chaos. So we need to establish the limit. We need promote the innovation, but we need do this in a responsible way. We need to understand the consequence, the impact for the civil rights. For example, this case of Meta, the Meta case, for example, what is the impact for one person or one company that concentrate? We have 224 millions. I'm not sure, but if my mind is not trapping me, I'm not sure, but I think that the number is almost this 224 millions of people in Brazil.
Just in
So
Brazil.
yes, so it's a lot of person. It's too much. Imagine processing. Imagine that each person have a meta social network profile. Imagine processing, I don't know, maybe half this, 100 and I don't know, 110 millions of personal data of each person, half population of Brazil. Processing this, what they do with this, create, I don't know, advertisement, create better chatbots, I don't know. And people don't understand how this impact your life in a negative way, because they even don't know how they can use the AI in a safe or security way. They think that, oh, okay, I can use ChatGPT to automate my email creation or etc. Some kind of this activity, but they forget that if you can automate everything that you do, you don't have a job. Someone have this idea, oh, I can replace this person for some LLM scripts here. I create an AI system using robot process automation, and I replace
the person. Yeah.
yes, many persons. I listen about one company that replaced one business area, all the business area. They fire and keep just one person because they automate all the process, and they just need keep one person in charge.
Yes.
So the technology is good, but we need make this in a we need establish the limits in a balance between what we can do and what is acceptable to do, because we said that it's not because it's technical possible you need do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's possible to do technical, but it's not like it's not good to do. You know, you have a moral ethics concerns to do this. Technically it's possible, but ethics is not possible. You have limits here, and because this we need the law, but the law needs to be clear about this. We cannot stop the innovation. We don't want this, but we want that this innovation use AI, generative, adaptive, or any kind of technology, emergent technology, use in a safe way for the persons, because in the end they are the weak in the chain.
Yep.
They are the most weak um, in the chain. When we talk chain impact, usually the humans are the most weak piece in this chain. Yes.
The weakest link.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And just as you mentioned, I think it's very relevant to just repeat it. Just because it's technically possible, it should not necessarily happen. And I think that's one of the main arguments for why we're seeing ethics and trustworthiness and safety being like the three main components for in the debate of AI governance, of AI regulation, because it goes beyond the effects that it could have on your personal data. It also touches on many levels across multiple sectors, and this can have different levels of impact through many different fundamental rights. So I think the argument in which, like, because I'm a lawyer and going back to law, of having a very solid system of human right protections right at the core of AI regulation is essential. Also with ethical standards. Now, it's very good that you were mentioning this, because I wanted to mention that when we think about the regulation efforts, not only in Latin America but also globally, we see that there can be a diverse range of ways or approaches to regulate AI. So, for example, we see that there are some laws, Peru being one of these examples, that are mainly principles based. And I think it was Peru that, sorry, no, the previous slide. Sorry, I did not include Peru here, but I wanted to mention it. So Peru has I think this 10-article law that is specifically applicable to the private sector, just outlining the principles and the standards that AI systems must follow. So that you could argue is just the principles-based approach. And we'll see whether the government in the future will issue like further regulations on that. A different approach is a rights-based approach. Another one is, for instance, relying heavily on algorithmic transparency obligations. The risk-based approach which was very much popularized by the European AI Act, or even other proposals that take up a more punitive approach. So it is common for legislators to consider one of these approaches, such as the case of Peru or the case of the EU AI Act, or to consider like a combination of these approaches. So for instance, we see that with the Brazilian proposal, at least the original proposal that was drafted based on the report of the Commission of Jurists, contemplated an extensive chapter of rights for the user, which gives us an idea that leans more towards a rights-based approach, but it also contemplated different obligations for AI agents depending on the level of risk of the AI system. In Chile, there's also a proposal that follows a risk-based approach, which is actually very similar to the EU AI Act. But here, the proposal leaves room for some exceptions to unacceptable risks. That if we recall correctly, the unacceptable risk systems in the EU AI Act are just that, are unacceptable, are prohibited. Well, Chile basically took a very similar approach to the EU AI Act, but it said, okay, for law enforcement, I will have some exceptions. There can be unacceptable, very high risk systems if they fall under some of these exceptions for law enforcement purposes. So that's something interesting to consider. Another very interesting element from Chile's proposal is that it contemplates that all high-risk systems must be registered in a national registry, and it also creates a national AI commission that will be in charge of approving all systems operating in the country. This approach is actually also taken by a very recent proposal that was introduced in the Senate in Mexico, where basically it's essentially the same, but instead of creating a national AI committee, it delegates these supervisory powers in the field of AI to the telecommunications regulator, who will also be in charge of approving all AI systems operating in the country. So these are like just examples of the legislative efforts that we've seen or that we've monitored recently in Latin America. And I do want to mention that aside from these legislative efforts, and Alessandra, as I was mentioning, some countries are still on this like waiting stage to see how they approach AI. We have seen, however, that most countries in Latin America, they have issued at least one sort of like national strategy or like a policy agenda or a plan where they basically set the foundation, or where they include like all the aspirations, values, ideas that the government has in relation to AI, and this affecting multiple sectors and also within different levels of government. And so most of these strategies contain policy recommendations, so like non-binding rules, but policy recommendations, and call for a coordinated effort for all levels of government to deploy AI in an ethical and trustworthy manner. And they have like this broad set of objectives, such as boosting economic development, improving social welfare, and so on. Now, the problem with these national strategies is that although they can be helpful, or they can be very illustrative to set the foundation for further regulations, is that most of them were issued by previous administrations, And so there is no certainty. I could not assure you that the current administrations are actually following or are continuing to implement these AI policies, which makes it a little bit harder to track and monitor in this respect. So moving on to the last slide, I wanted to mention that in this context where we have like a list of good wishes, a list of good intentions that are basically reflected through national strategies, and on the other hand, we have just very few countries, like 3 or 4, with like real proposals to pass legislation in AI. I do feel that we need to talk a little bit about the role that international organizations play in this regard, in shaping the debate of AI governance. So first of all, international organizations can play a very important role because they can help us determine global standards that can facilitate interoperability and cooperation among countries that adhere to this type of recommendations. And considering that it is very likely that more countries will continue to regulate AI through national legislation, the contributions from these international organizations can be helpful in harmonizing AI policies and concepts and principles across many countries. So I just listed a couple of examples that I think are the most relevant and the ones that are helping the most shape AI governance, not only in Latin America, but also globally. So starting with the OECD AI principles, these principles basically serve as a basis to promote innovation and trustworthy use of AI, with it very much in alignment with the values of the OECD, which are basically to protect fundamental rights, which we were just mentioning, and to protect democratic values. And notably, for the Latin American region, Mexico, Costa Rica, Argentina, Brazil, and Peru, they have all committed to these AI principles. So in theory, these principles should also guide their policymaking in the future. And even though we don't have a consistency for consistency with the national strategies that I was mentioning previously, we might find some level of consistency and interoperability with this type of international commitments. The other one is the OECD's recommendation that was issued by their Council on AI in 2019. So here are several countries in the region, including Colombia and the other ones that I previously mentioned, have adhered to this recommendation. And this recommendation basically introduces a common understanding on key terms. So basically, what is AI? What is an AI life cycle? Like very basic concepts that can help to have interoperable frameworks. And importantly, it also introduces principles for responsible and trustworthy AI. So here, some of the principles include the main ones that we already know, such as fairness and privacy, but it also includes other principles that are related to sustainable growth, to innovation, to respecting the rule of law, and so on. So very important from my perspective. And it also includes recommendation for creating national policies and fostering international cooperation on AI. So basically, it recommends members adhering to this recommendation to include in their national policies other elements that touch upon AI, such as investing in AI research and development, training and capacity building, and generally preparing society for impacts and unintended consequences from AI. One example being the displacement, for instance, of some labor and employment, and how this may affect individuals. So I think this is very relevant because it includes like it is saying to members that are adhering to this recommendation to basically take steps or take measures to prepare society for this type of impacts as well. So it's not all about regulating and issuing laws and so on, but actually creating like coherent and comprehensive policies, given the scope and the scale and the impact of AI in our lives. I also included the UNESCO recommendation on ethics of AI. So basically, this recommendation includes a wide set of values and principles to follow, and it also analyzes multiple areas of policy action, including research, economy, healthcare, among other areas. And okay.
One thing about the UNESCO recommendation on ethics, I think that the deontological model that UNESCO proposed in this ethical model, because they talk about the human centric, the human flourish, like the human growth, like a centric about the policies, right? I like this approach, the UNESCO recommendation, when we talk about the concerns and principles, ethical and integrity principles to create this or to provide or promote trustworthy, responsible accountability when we talk about AI. I like the UNESCO approach. I use this model to try explain the persons that we need have a baseline to establish the ethical uh, pain points or the ethical line to create a AI governance model. You need to establish your baseline for ethics concerns, ethics questions. You need to formulate your, I don't know, your statements. Have one document that for me they is very clean and easy to understand, the Humbug Declaration. I'm not sure, but I think that Humbug Declaration is 2019, is the same time of the OECD. They have just 7 principles. They said first, the AI not cannot become or transform humans in things. They cannot um make harms for the humans, and have a 7 statements, very simple and very useful to try understand the limits, the ethical, the moral limits to establish a AI governance model and try create uh, AI systems, respect human centric, respect the privacy, respect the civil rights, and etc.
Yeah, that's very very interesting. I totally forgot about including that one, but actually I'm so happy that you mentioned it, because if you take a look at who issued this declaration, it was actually the group, or it was in the context of the Conference of Independent Data Protection Supervisory Authorities, which actually brings me to the next point that I wanted to make. That particularly in Latin America, and I mentioned this earlier in my presentation, we are seeing the increasing role that data protection authorities are taking to shape the debate on AI governance. And so, for instance, in Latin America, I'm not sure if you've heard about the network before, the Ibero-American Network for Data Protection Authorities, which basically brings together the data protection authorities from this region, including Portugal and Spain. And as I mentioned previously, they have been pretty active in also shaping the discussion. So one example is through issuing recommendations on the processing of personal data in the context of AI. And they also take from common standards or common principles that are shared by this group of data protection authorities according to their own laws on how to process data in the context of AI. And another way that they are having some impact is through this research and coordinated enforcement investigation into generative AI tools for the moment, such as the case of ChatGPT. So it's very interesting to see this increasing role of data protection authorities in the context of AI, such as with the Hamburg Declaration. And last but not least, I wanted to, if I have, I'm gonna run. The very last instrument that I wanted to mention is the Council of Europe Convention on Artificial Intelligence. This was actually passed very, very recently, and it is a framework convention that actually became the first international treaty on AI that will be open for ratification to countries, regardless whether they are members of the Council of Europe or not. And so this convention is relevant for two things. First, because all the countries that adhere to this convention will basically get this sort of like binding legal obligations under international law. So this means they will be required to legislate or to harmonize their legal frameworks with the provisions of this framework convention. And this is important because the framework convention goes beyond setting just like a list of principles, and it includes a sort of more prescriptive approach and requirements for the regulation of AI systems. So I think it will be very interesting to see which countries get to adhere to this convention and how this will shape or modify their legal frameworks, which is something that already happens, for instance, with the Convention 108 on the processing of personal data. However, only Argentina and Uruguay, I think, have ratified this convention. Mexico is still in the process of doing so. But it will be very interesting indeed. And I wanted to mention it because it became the first international treaty on AI. So that will be something interesting to watch. And with that, I think we are up.
No, don't worry. Don't worry with the time. We can pass some minutes. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, just to recap a little bit, I think that the Latin American constitutional and legal framework is solid, and it does provide enough protection for fundamental rights, not only for privacy and data protection, but other set of rights in the context of AI. However, I do believe that it's necessary to update data protection laws to keep, in the same pace with technological evolution, if that's ever possible, or at least do so through a principle or human rights-based approach. At the same time, though, I think that it would be a mistake to wait for countries to update their data protection laws before attempting to regulate artificial intelligence, because as we already discussed, most of the use of AI and deployment is happening without much guidance and regulation. And I think particularly in Latin America, it will be very interesting to see the case of Brazil. I think it will be very influential, and it could be very beneficial for the conversation on AI governance, particularly in the Latin American region. Of course, having some impact in other countries that are also watching globally. And finally, I think that policymakers should continue to look at the efforts that some of these international organizations are putting out there to help shape the debate on AI governance, and also adhere to more interoperable frameworks and enhance cooperation in AI. I heard this phrase in another conference, and I think it's really true that global that AI governance should be global, and it should only come from the global north. So it will be very, very relevant to see the global south becoming more active in this type of conversations.
I think that it's very, very important, your highlights, your pain points that you highlight in your presentation, because people, even the most part, do not understand how much this immersion technology, because AI is just one. Generative AI is just one. We have many other immersion technologies. So, an example of Argentina, I'm not sure, but Argentina and have another. They, for example, update your personal data to include the neuro data, right? Like a personal, sensitive, and need to be treated with very carefully. We have some limits to treat this data, to process this data. So, for example, I do not see this in Brazil. I do not see. I did not yet, but I think in my mind the way that we describe personal sensitive data, we can suppose we can suppose that the neural data and brains data, whatever, if you put some kind of implant like a Neuralink, Elon Musk Neuralink, for example, uh, is your sensitive personal data. It's not the data is yours. You just use the technology to try improve your health, your disabilities, or etc. But the data is yours.
Exactly.
You just need share maybe to try improve the equipment, the hardware, the gadget, or the software that you control the gadget, the device. But they cannot use this data for any kind of other or any other purpose, you know, because it's your data. It's very personal. For example, in my mind, and I have this concern because we always need right in a clear way, because all the time have someone very smart try use, oh, I offer my platform. No, you do not offer. If you not pay, you are the product. So never accept or never believe in that someone gives some free thing to you, because in the end you are the product. And now in this moment, it's like the we are the uh, like the money back of all these social networks. They never charge us for many years to try amount a lot of data about all the persons, and now they have enough data to training any technology, any kind of emergent technology. So we feed this. So we have our fault. We never make the questions. We never have doubt about this. And now we understand that all this information concentrated in one hand, in one or two, three companies, it's very dangerous, because they have enough information to manipulate us. So this, in my mind, is why makes sense update the personal data protection laws. And this is, in my mind, makes sense that the data protection laws need work hands-on or hands together with the AI bills and cyber laws to protect against the cyber attacks. the cybercrime, etc. Because in the end, if this big tech's not used, maybe they be stolen by other groups, and these groups use this data to make frauds. In the end of the day, we have this problem too. If you compare, Brazil have many, it's like almost a champion in Latin America about the cyber attacks, ransomwares, any kind of malwares, etc. So we need put these three lines work together: the laws to protect the data, to use or to promote trustworthy and responsible use of technology, any kind of technology, and the laws to uh, fight against the cyber crimes and the cyber threats. So, in my mind, makes sense. These three lines work together. I don't know. What do you think about this?
No. I completely agree. And to be honest, this is outside my field of expertise, cybersecurity. But when I monitor developments in data protection, very often I find that countries in Latin America are also like taking on more efforts to update their cybersecurity frameworks. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Chile was one of the most recent countries in like implementing a cybersecurity law and creating like this new agency that will be in charge of doing that, of enforcing this law. So going back to what you're saying, I think it's very interesting also how like on the level of agencies of regulatory action, how they will coordinate to make, to implement these laws. Um, but yeah, I think it's definitely something worth to watch. And I was gonna, oh yeah, so going back to you mentioned the example of Neuralink, for instance, and the use of sensitive data. And that's actually a very interesting discussion that has also matured a lot in Latin America, in particular, with the movement of neural rights, which actually I think it started from Chile. And the Supreme Court in Chile has, I think, this one of a kind constitutional case where they assessed whether a company could use neural data for other purposes. And it's very interesting. I can't remember if it was Neuralink or if it was another company.
I do not remember too, but I read about this.
Yeah, and one of the like the main debates for legal among the legal community is, do we actually need new regulations or a new set of laws protecting neural rights or neural data when we already have some provisions protecting sensitive data, which of course I would argue includes neural data on our data protection laws. But this is part, I think, of a bigger conversation, a bigger debate on whether we need like more detailed regulations and like new and additional laws regulating very specific aspects of very specific technologies. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
So we almost in the end. So I want to ask to you make your final considerations about the Latin America panorama. What you're feeling about the report, about the milestones, the key findings that you find here in this report when you research about the Latin American different laws, and what is your advice for the women that want to enter in the privacy area or in the data protection, or the women's that now actually they are in this area, but they not know what I can study, how I can improve my knowledge. What are your advice for who is in the beginning, who is in the I don't know, change the area, and who is in the area but want to learn more? What is your tips, your advice for these women?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll start first with the first question related to like this general state of play in Latin America and how we're seeing it. So just to provide a little bit of context, FPF released a recent report. I can share the link in a while on the basically providing a set an overview of the national strategies and priorities that are being taken by data protection authorities in this region. And we focused on 4 elements. We analyzed their regulatory priorities in the sense of like the areas in which DPAs are focusing to issue new guidance, new regulation or recommendations. We also focused on enforcement, on advocacy and public participation activities, and also on training and capacity building. So for the first 2, for regulatory and enforcement priorities, we've seen that most of the data protection authorities in the country, in the region, they are looking into, of course, AI, not surprising. So they are seeking to issue more guidance and to also ramp up their investigatory powers on anything related to AI, really. But there are also other key topics that will be of their attention. So, for instance, the regulation of sensitive data. So very relevant for what we were mentioning on this discussion on neural rights and neural data. Also, there's a lot of focus on setting clear rules for the processing of personal data of children and the youth. I think this is particularly the case of Brazil, that they even have like a public consultation going on as we speak. So very interesting to follow this type of regulatory actions and enforcement. Also related to enforcement, I don't want to repeat it, but I'll say it again very quickly. We have seen a lot of action from the Ibero-American network. They have been particularly active through their working groups, one of them being on AI, and particularly the investigation they're doing to ChatGPT that is ongoing. But also they created another working group on neural rights in particular, and another working group that will focus on, I think, digital violence and health and digital health. So very interesting to see this type of priorities take place in the next few years. Also, another thing that we've seen is that, as we know, one of the main challenges in Latin America is the need to increase a lot more awareness about a culture of data protection. And thank God, authorities are very aware about this issue. So they are definitely investing more resources in enhancing the awareness and creating more data protection culture among individuals. And last but not least, as we know, resources are always limited, and this is also true for data protection authorities. So most of them will just continue to try to do their best with the allocated resources. But this includes more training, more capacity building of their staff, like internally, and specifically to learn more about emerging technologies and the role that data protection provisions play in that context. So it will be very relevant to follow this. I am going to share the link right now for you to check in the report if you like to.
Yes, please. I read the. Okay, Thank you. I will put in the chat.
And last but not least, well, my recommendation for women in this space. Okay, so first of all, I think there is a lot of available resources out there. If we've learned something, if we had something positive about being like online all the time after the pandemic, is that there are a lot of more resources and opportunities of online training or education courses on AI. Of course, this type of resources may be of limited access for some people, but I do believe that, for instance, the resources that are published by international organizations or by civil society institutions are quite useful. So my first recommendation would be that, to always keep your curiosity going, to try to gather all the resources as possible. And also, and this is a little bit troublesome, and I'm going to be really honest, I think in this space is particularly challenging because it feels like you need to know about everything, like about a lot of things and covering a lot of topics. And that can be overwhelming. So my advice to that, and I'm still navigating through that, is basically try to find what sparks most your interest. Try to find like dedicated resources, whether it is, I'm interested in ethical AI guidelines, then I'm just gonna, focus on that type of resource. Or I have like a more technical approach, then I'm gonna focus on that types of resources. And that's good, but at the same time, I would say, I'm sorry, I think this is actually like contradictory, but I would say that even if you have a technical background, it is necessary for you to understand a little bit of the policy and legal resources that are out there. So keeping your curiosity always, ask questions. And the third one would be to, of course, participate in this type of forums, in this type of initiatives. I think, Alessandra, you're doing a great job leading this type of initiative. And there are many other communities that are also, trying to promote and to bring more women and young voices to this conversation, which is absolutely essential because we're talking about the future. We're talking about technologies that impact our daily lives, and I think it's crucial for all of us to be involved in this debate. And the last one, I thought that was going to be the last one, but the very last one would be to not be afraid to ask questions and to make connections and to network, be present, be in the forums and the conferences, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That would be my suggestions for women looking to dive into this space.
Thank you, Maria. First, I appreciate for your time. Thank you to accept our invite. Thank you to FBF too to permit that you share your knowledge and your time with us. Thank you. And I need give some great thanks our sponsors for IBRASPD. The IBRASPD is a non-profit organization too. I am the vice president, and we have some sponsors here. Our diamond sponsors, Nova 8, Century Data. Nosso muito obrigada. Thank you very much. Aos nossos patrocinadores Platinum, Vitara, Security AI, muito obrigada. Thank you very much. E aos nossos Gold sponsors, nossos patrocinadores Gold, JC Advisor, APA Consulting, muito obrigada. Aos nossos apoiadores, our community support, WONSI, Cybersecurity Girls, Antebello, EFIA, nosso muito obrigada a vocês, parceiros, our partnerships, muito obrigado a vocês, parceiros. E agradeço a audiência. Thank you very much for our audience. This webinar will be available on YouTube. So if you cannot watch in the real time, you can watch it after this. Or again, if you maybe you can turn back in some point, you can listen again, watch it again. So thank you, our audience. Thank you, all sponsors and our partners. So thank you very much. See you in the next Women Community in Privacy. Thank you. Good night and bye-bye.
Thank you, Alessandra. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.